All right, everyone. Miss Michigan was stripped of her title because she told the truth about multiple things that are considered hot-button political topics. Now, this is a lesson to girls that are in, like, pageantry and stuff. Don't bother showing how smart you actually are. Like, I can see through it. Sometimes these girls pretend to not know about or not care about, like, politics and stuff. They pretend to be airheaded, and the reason for that is just, I think that they just get tired of it. They don't want people asking about nuclear physics after they have to walk the runway and spend 5 hours in makeup and doing their hair and shit. They're like, here, I'm pretty, look at me, and then let me go back and fucking take a nap, basically. I can actually respect that. But she decided not to go down that route. She said she's a University of Michigan student. And I guess what she said online, and this is why she was stripped of her title, they said, oh, it's racist and insensitive. She said there's a try on a hijab day on campus. And since when did this stop being a religious garb? Like, this is messed up. That was the first part of the statement. I'm like, when I'm reading this, I'm like, there are Islamic people who would say literally the same thing, that their culture was being mocked, that their religion was being mocked by the idea of having a fucking booth there so people can go and pretend to be Muslim for 5 minutes. Oh, says the painfully westernized trust fund student with the Che Guevara shirt and the crapple iPhone. Look at me, I'm so multicultural and tolerant. I'm gonna go try on the hijab and then I'm gonna eat a falafel. And it's just like a never-ending cavalcade of stereotypes that these morons fucking heap one on top of the other. Imagine they had a fucking try on a yarmulke day. Why don't you do try on a yarmulke day at the fucking University of Michigan and see how long it is before the SPLC is breathing down your neck? This is insensitive and intolerant, and you're mocking and appropriating. Yeah, you're mocking Jewish culture if you do that to some extent. Here, fucking put on the yarmulke and we'll go out, and here we've got a big cardboard mock-up of the Wailing Wall. Ooh, isn't it wonderful? Ha ha ha. Look at us from the safety of our fucking campus where we pay five figures every semester. We can pretend to be members of another culture. How multicultural, diverse, and tolerant we are. That's basically what it boils down to. By the way, Kathy Zhu happens to be Asian. So she's in one of those minority groups that the left no longer cares to actually fight for, and actually prefers to heap shit on. But it's very funny. So she points out this is still a religious garment, so it's like this is messed up. And then she says, I'm not going to celebrate the oppression of women. Well, what's wrong with that? She's not saying, well, Islamists oppress women. No, what she's saying is that there are countries in the world that are majority Muslim, especially in the doctrinal sense, countries that are run by Sharia and shit, where women are mistreated. Wow, but that's a true statement. There's no surprise here. 10 years ago, liberals used to talk about that all the time and how it was problematic. They said, wow, yeah, there's a lot of problems in some of these countries. Saudi Arabia is like women can't own property, they can't drive, they can't go out without a male relative. It's like it's oppressive. They used to understand that there was an objective metric upon which you could measure oppression. Now they pretend that it's all relative and they say, no, well, we're kind of oppressive too because we expect women to wear bikinis and stuff. It's like, no, women can dress how they want here. There are plenty of countries in the world where they can't. Now you can say, well, that's a misinterpretation of Islam. Look, this part of this surah says that this is overruled. Okay, you can interpret it that way. I find it funny. I find it funny when non-Islamic Westerners interpret the Quran and the Hadiths, and they think that their interpretation is going to be more accepted in Saudi Arabia than some cleric from Saudi Arabia, okay? Somebody whose family has been Islamic for 1,000 years, they're a high-level cleric. Their opinion is worth more than yours with regards to interpreting Islamic scripture. You may think from your ivory castle that your interpretation is more doctrinal, more logically coherent, less superstitious, and therefore right. That's a very Western ethnocentric way of looking at it. I think you'll find that you're in the minority if you actually go to the Middle East. Yes, there are nations in this world today that are hyper-religious. We used to understand this as liberals. There are nations in the world that are hyper-religious in which women and homosexuals and sometimes ethnic or racial minorities or expat groups from other national origins that migrated in and are trying to assimilate are mistreated, and it's because, in part, in some cases, of a reinterpretation of Islam that is more modern, number one, and often, number two, very much rooted in national and cultural identity. tribal identity and things of that nature. Yes, it has been interpreted that way. Mistreatment of women is very common in some of these groups. Now, in some it's not. You know, you go to, you know, urban Turkey, or you go to Ankara or something, you're not going to see very many people practicing Sharia. You go to some of the more developed areas, even in the countries that are, you know, more religiously fervent, and you'll find less problems. But it is there. I find it very funny that a liberal will say Christianity bad because oppression of women, like, oh my goodness, this Christian group, and that they're always, you know, saying weird shit about women. They probably don't even think they should vote, and yet you have countries where women get killed for being raped, and it's seen as not a problem. And then there was another post that she made. I guess this was a response later on the same thread, where she said, well, when crimes, I think when violent crimes, what did she say? Violent crimes towards black Americans are often perpetrated by other black Americans, and so these communities need help, or something like that. How is this insensitive? It's true. The fact is that liberal policies left behind inner city black communities to their own devices, and so you have large amounts of crime, and cities are highly segregated. If you have an area that's high crime, most of those crimes are going to involve people of the same race, and that's the same for a black community as any other community. You have a high crime area in which 90% of the population is of one race, no fucking shit that's going to affect statistics. She's not saying, oh, these criminal individuals, these people with darker skin are inferior to me because of some metric within crime. She's not saying that. She's pointing out a true statistic and urging that people should probably try to fix it. What the fuck is the problem with that? How do you fix a problem if you're not willing to acknowledge that it exists in the first place? You can say, well, that's because of bad policing. It's because of corrupt politicians. It's because, you know, the government takes educational money away from black communities. Ascribe it to whatever the fuck you want. The problem is still there. Putting your head in the sand and pretending it's not there and stripping her of her title for pointing it out is crazy talk. Total 1984 dystopianism. You don't have to be racist to acknowledge these problems in the world. In fact, it helps not to be, because if you're racist, you're some racist white person, you probably don't care about the fact that the inner cities have crime problems. You're some fucking sexist, you probably don't care about the plight of women in Saudi Arabia. If you're a bigoted, hateful individual, yeah, you probably ignore these problems. And if you're a fucking lunatic, if you're a sellout, you call yourself leftist or liberal or something, but ultimately you're really just an authoritarian jackbooter. And you go along with what Big Brother says, and you're mind numbed, and you're easily convinced to be silent because you're just a slime bag. Yeah, you're not going to talk about these problems. So kudos to Kathy Zhu for actually being willing to speak out and having a little bit of knowledge about politics and some of the problems in the world today. It's very, very funny when literally just telling the truth, when literally saying things that are objectively factual, will get you, censored, will get you mistreated because of your political views being insensitive. Oh, the truth is insensitive. Don't mention this truth because it makes people a little bit upset. Fuck you. You should be upset at the fact that there's injustice in the world. You should be upset that there's too much crime in the inner city. Since when is it insensitive to fucking point that out and say, well, maybe we should probably try to do something about that? Hey, there are women around the world that are basically slaves. There's about 1 billion of them in the world. Maybe we should do something about that and stop beating ourselves up for microaggressions or manspreading. Maybe homophobia. Maybe instead of saying orange man hates gays because, all he did was make sure gay rights spread to Botswana, maybe we should look at hyper-religious communities around the world where being homosexual will get you tossed off a building. Maybe that's a bigger problem than somebody over here telling Biden's gay waiter joke. Maybe killing people is worse than telling a joke on a late-night comedy tour or something like that. Maybe there's an objective measure of these things. Maybe one thing victimizes people, the other thing is just fucking comedy. But they're not willing to deal with that. No, because these people, they're armchair activists. They want to make a tweet and fund someone on Patreon, some creator that says cute things that make them feel better about themselves. They want to make a YouTube video saying, oh, let's all just get along, and playing with their love beats. They don't want to go over to Saudi Arabia and protest. They don't want to go over to Russia and talk about gay rights, with some fucking former KGB member. They don't want to do these big things. They're trust funders, they're gated communities, sell out so-called liberals. They're liberal in name only. Not liberal. There's a bunch of fucking authoritarians. They'd rather try to... They think activism is getting her crown as Miss Michigan removed for saying something that challenges their worldview. That challenges their view that they can change the world from their living room with their crapple product that was made by slaves in China, most of which weren't even adults. Good on you, what a good liberal activist you are. Wonderful people. That's about all. Peace out.